Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Stand to End Rape is an NGO focused on the eradication of sexual and domestic violence within Nigeria. Here to give us an insight into the work they've been doing is Public Relations Manager and Communications Manager Jola Ayeye. Welcome to the morning show.
Good morning.
It's great to have you.
Thank you.
We've spoken about rape so much in Nigeria. We've seen all the walks, we've seen all the interaction on social media, and not enough as it should be. But tell us, what is this organization doing to help talk about this in more depth and enlighten people about what's going on?
Okay, so Stand to End Rape was founded in 2014 to kind of help survivors with the process of finding justice, which is quite difficult because a lot of our ideas of social justice and justice in general is very communal or society-based. And because we're also quite a religious society, people believe in like cosmic or karma will get up with the person eventually. So what Stand to End Rape does is that we work with survivors from the beginning, making sure that you go to the hospital, making sure that you have a good support system around you, making sure that you're keeping in contact with people and that you're not internalizing blame. And then we try and make sure that you're speaking to like a licensed therapist or a psychologist, someone that can sort of like help you with the process of healing. And then if people want to, we help them with the police process as well. So going to fill out a report, going to court, getting a lawyer that's affordable. But most of what we do is kind of keeping people's morale up. So that's male and female survivors.
Right. What would you say the rape stats is now? What does it stand at now?
The numbers are much higher than we think they are because one of the biggest stumbling blocks is that people are afraid to report. So what we do find with Stand to End Rape in the work we've done is we're getting a lot of minors, so that's children. And what we found is parents are very afraid of their child being labeled the one that was raped. So even when they do go to get help, they don't want to file an official report because that means that the minor still has to come in and is getting asked the same questions over and over again. Society might ask, well, what are you doing or what are you looking at? But I do think the only stats we do have access to are Western reports, which tell us that it's roughly 1 in 3 women and I think 1 in 6 or 7 men that has been sexually assaulted. And I think the numbers are slightly similar in Nigeria. But then I also worry that they might be slightly higher because of our understanding of consent and what a child is, what a teenager is. We tend to blur the numbers based on our idea of what culture is as well. Yeah. So you hear things like, well, she's 16 and she's 15 and she's 14 and stuff like that. So I do worry that the numbers might be a lot higher than we would like to think. But because we don't have solid statistics, it's really difficult to say.
Right. So how would you describe, what would you describe consent as?
Consent is, what I like is the fact that the conversation is being had more often. And consent to me and to the organization, we found that it's very, very problematic to assume consent in terms of, because you hear things like body language and the problem with things with body language in particular is that you're taking for granted the idea of an initial relationship. So consent is explicit, verbal, active permission to go ahead with a sexual act, or I don't know if I'm explaining it properly, but the main point is verbal. And there's this idea that, oh, if you start talking, it ruins the mood. Oh, it's not sexy. Oh, yeah. And the problem with that is you're making the assumption that you're making the assumption that kind of wanting to do it is better than a willing, active participant. Right. And that stems from people attaching shame to sexual relations and sexuality. So the idea that a woman or man who is fully into what they're doing is doing something wrong. And what we've done is we've attached that to how people ought to behave in a sexual scenario. Right. And it gives room for all that. Well, she didn't really say no, but he didn't really say no. And so consent is verbal, active participation.
Okay, verbal, active participation.
Yes.
And we do know that, you know, in marriages there is a lot of rape.
Yes.
But you would hear people outside say, but that's his wife, that's her husband, you know. How can we educate people more on what it is to actually be raped, and the blame game as well, because there's a lot of blame put on the victim. And as you rightly said, it's a lot to do with the culture, society, and religion as well. You go to some places or you go to some churches, and if you're dressed a certain way, it's automatically they automatically say, oh, you're trying to, you know, seduce men. And it's like, no.
Really.
So why are we thinking in this manner?
I think it's a function of like a breakdown in our understanding of society and a breakdown in our ability to empathize and give people full autonomy. So by taking, so it's at the same time, you want to take away a person's choice and then push back the choice you've made for them onto them. So you won't fully allow a person express himself or herself by the way she wants to dress or move or go around or handle herself. And then when an individual then pushes their own agenda or forces someone to do something they don't want to do, you then quickly say, well, based on how you presented yourself, this is what has happened to you. So I think it's important that to educate people is one of the most difficult things. There's the assumption that educating people is just so easy. You just say what you want to say and then you go. It's very tedious, arduous work because you have to work really hard on each step that takes you to thinking that this is an appropriate reaction. And so it's not a one-day thing. Sometimes it's months of work, sometimes it's years, it's repeated work, it's being careful of the actions and the words you use. So if you, instead of saying things like, that skirt is inviting trouble, just say the truth. I don't like that skirt. I don't want you to wear that skirt. Why? I don't feel comfortable if you wear that skirt.
This is as a partner now, or
as a partner, as a parent, as a friend. You have to be careful of the language you use. Because what that means is you're sending signals. By saying that's inviting trouble, the person who could make trouble, you've given them tacit, you've then given them tacit consent to do whatever they want and say, well, society will say,
that your skirt is inviting
so
trouble.
it's very important that we start, and even from really, really young, that's something that I've learned in working with Stand to End Rape. There's the fear that teaching children about sexual assault, don't touch me, don't let people touch you here, building the bond of trust. There's this, sometimes we've heard things like, well, people are afraid that if they give their children the assumption that they can come to them with anything or say anything, the child will learn to lie really quickly or want to put other people in trouble. It's really, really difficult for a child to come up with, for a toddler to come up with the concept, with the idea of framing someone for rape. So we need to make sure that children understand that when nobody's allowed to touch them, and no matter how close anybody else is to you, if a child comes to you and tells you somebody is doing something to them, you have to have really created the environment that lets the child know that no matter how threatened they are, even if it's mommy's cousin or sister or friend, mommy has told me, and I believe mommy when she says that if I come to her and I tell her that this person is doing this to me, she'll believe me. Because a lot of the abuse that happens in those situations is not by strangers. It's by really close family members. And the children generally do believe that mommy will not believe me if I say it's this person.
Because I was going to ask about the age, you know, like how soon do we start having this conversation?
Oh, as soon as you see that they're cognizant. Because children are not, they're not stupid, because there's the assumption for some reason that there are things that children, obviously there are things they can't handle, but if you tell your child, and they're still very malleable and obedient, which is why it's easy for predators to take advantage. So if you do tell your child that, look, this is mommy, and use the right language. People are so afraid because they think it's lewd or crude. Use the right language, because what will then happen is an abuser can teach them will make the child feel implicated in his or her own abuse by saying that they are teaching them something that they know is wrong. Don't tell mommy that I told you what a breast is, or you can't tell mommy, and things like that. So teach your children the right language. Teach them about their private parts as soon as they are. Don't let them use slang for it. Because it's very important that they're able to tell you what exactly has happened to them. Make sure you're checking with them often. How do you feel today? Who carried you today? Are you okay? Did anybody do anything that you didn't like? Did anybody tell you not to tell mommy a secret today? Watch out for their moods as well. But the most important thing is, as soon as they're cognizant and as soon as they're able to wander off on their own, or they're able to amuse themselves, just make sure that you're just checking on them very often and teaching them things. But now there are books and thankfully there's YouTube that can teach you how to. If you are really worried about how to do it properly, there's resources available to help you with the process.
And there are a lot of parents that already, they're very proactive, because I do know like a few mothers who, they will say that, okay, you can only sit on this uncle's lap, only this uncle's lap, and your dad's lap. No, so even if another man says, maybe if it's somewhere very innocent like the church or at your workplace or something, and there's an uncle there and he wants to place the girl on her lap, the girl will say, no, mummy said I can't sit on your lap. And it might be, you know, the problem is people get offended, but I think prevention is better than cure.
Yeah, always.
We need to also...
One thing we didn't actually touch on was the marital rape.
Yes.
You see, because a lot of women don't know how to address that. It's like, well, he's my husband, you know. So how do we educate women, and what exactly is rape in a marriage?
Rape within a marriage is simply the fact that you do not want to have sexual activity or any sort of sexual liaison, and your partner pushes or pressures or forces or coerces you. And it's one of those things where you hear in like a lot of women kind of admit it without really admitting it. So they'll say something like, you should just do it and stand up, I'm tired and I'm not in the mood, and things like that. But I think the way to educate women is for them to understand that your feelings within a sexual relationship are very valid.
Right.
And it doesn't matter that you are married. Best type of sex is sex that both partners really want. That's the best type of sex. And so you should be encouraging women to speak to their partners honestly, and encouraging men to listen and speak to their partners honestly.
And vice versa as well, because sometimes the guy's not
exactly,
interested.
he's not in the mood. And it's also the understanding of sex as a right, which sounds really weird, but it's a pleasure and it's an activity that you should do with somebody that you care about
like
if you want to,
else.
but don't then take it on to be some sort of right of yours to impose on someone who has entered some sort of quote-unquote contract with you. So that's the especially in Africa, where we still have the concept of bride price, something I paid for. So it's important that we teach women that it's a matter of communication. Letting your partner know that this is how I feel, this is what makes sex good for me. When I say no, I'm not joking. It's not something that should be coerced in, and let men to be able to speak honestly about it. And by the time you do that, then you're not taking away the fact that if someone says no, it's like a personal affront.
Amazing,
learned so much today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's time now for a quick break. Our take is next. Don't go away.